This time on Militaria at the museum, we'll see various pieces of propaganda that were distributed during wartime. After that, we'll look at the evolution of engine order telegraphs and how they were used on ships and submarines to communicate orders from the bridge to the engine room. Finally, we'll examine an unmarked wooden aircraft part that was recovered from a crash site. Beyond museum exhibits lies a hidden realm of archived artifacts that hold the keys to unlocking intriguing stories from the past. Come along as I meet with experts at the Army, Naval, and Aviation museums, where I've been granted special access to pull back the curtains and reveal the secrets of their militaria. My name is Sandy Hiltz, and all my life I've been captivated by military history. Now, I have the rare opportunity to explore a collection of fascinating military artifacts on Militaria at the museum. At the Army Museum, Chief Curator Julie Thomas is going to show me the museum's collection of wartime propaganda. Propaganda was widespread during times of conflict to influence public sentiment surrounding the war and politics. It came in many forms, including posters, radio broadcasts, and pamphlets.
Come on in.
Goodness, Julie, you seem to have a bit of a penchant for propaganda.
I really do, yes.
Well, this is great.
Propaganda is any means by which somebody or some organization is trying to get you to feel or behave in a certain way. Oftentimes, propaganda revolves around either a good feeling or a bad feeling. So if we want somebody to feel good about something, themes will generally be quite cheery. They'll have bright colors and positive messages. Or they could be really dehumanizing. So some of the imagery from the First World War has, wounded soldiers in it, exploded buildings or places on fire, trying to evoke fear. They're trying to dehumanize the enemy so that we don't want to associate with them or we think of them as other.
I was thinking about propaganda, and I was thinking the best place to start might be sort of the earliest piece you have in here in this collection. What would that be?
Actually, the earliest piece I have is this one here.
This would be First War, would it?
This is from the First World War. Yeah, it's got early imagery. This is probably 1915. The names listed on the flag are officers that passed away in the war, and it's calling on men to do the honorable thing.
Right.
They're holding up those four men, like Mark, St. Julien, Pestevere, and Givenchy, as heroes. And they're asking more men to sign up and become heroes as well.
And to carve out your own little piece of history as they have it.
Right, yes.
Right.
At the beginning of the First World War, there's no sort of central theme or central body saying, oh, this is the big message we want to send.
Right.
So while this is a great enlisting poster, sort of Canada-wide, many of the regiments had to put out their own propaganda and their own posters asking people to enlist. This is a really excellent example of a regiment advertising for soldiers to enlist directly with them. And it wasn't just soldiers that are needed on the front line. Here we're calling for people that work in forestry or work in sawmills, because before you can move an army somewhere, you need a road, you need trenches dug, you need all kinds of infrastructure to do that. And that's what the 224th is doing. They're advertising for people with those skills already to come and enlist and join the war. It wasn't just regiments and units that got involved, but also businesses put out their own sort of propaganda and information. So it was really kind of a free-for-all of what you were going to get.
So being as this is from a specific regiment, is this again before they sort of centralized the production of propaganda, Julie?
Right. Although during the entire First World War, they still do their own sort of advertising and calling for more soldiers and more enlisted.
Julie, what is the main purpose of the centralization of the propaganda, and what are they attempting to do in the psyche of the nation?
The real reason to centralize any propaganda is to send out one unified message. This poster is starting to play at people's feelings of guilt.
Right.
If you cannot put the I into fight, they're really still trying to get you to enlist, right? The guy looks really heroic. He's got his rifle and his bayonet out. but they're really guilting you. Why can't you fight? What's wrong with you that you're not going to the front lines? So then they bring it down and they say, well, if you can't fight, make sure you give us money. The Canadian Patriotic Fund was there to help support families of soldiers that had gone or soldiers that had come back from war and needed monetary support. When governments are putting out propaganda, they want to put a spin on it that, hey, support us, or what we're doing is really the right thing to be doing, and it's the right direction to be going in. This is really an interesting piece of art that we have, and it's definitely talking to the guilt. This wouldn't have been displayed anywhere near a reservation or anything like that. It would have been displayed in large cities, and it's speaking directly to white males. The standard was to give a quarter, but here we see that we have an Indigenous person who's like, I'm supporting the war. But in his little letter that they've written and translated, he speaks that I'm not just giving a quarter, I'm giving $1.50 to the Patriotic Fund, even though we know that wasn't really what was happening at the time.
Right.
Which really then is like a jab, right? Like,
sure,
if I can do this, you should be doing more. You know, Indigenous people wanted to enlist and weren't allowed.
Right.
So they're just taking stereotypical images from, you know, that period of time sort of landscape and speaking directly to white males. During the First World War, propaganda was often very text heavy. It was very serious. During the Second World War, we're coming out of the Depression. It's much more welcoming. It invites you in. Whereas during the First World War, you would see it and you would get the feeling that war was hard, but it was something that we all had a duty to participate in.
So now we've clearly moved on to the Second World War here, Julie, and my goodness, it's quite a change.
As we can see here, the posters are much more colorful.
Right.
They're meant to be eye-catching. The big message had to be bring Canada together as one. And if we see it in the blue poster there, if the cap fits wear it, they're not just talking about recruiting sailors or infantrymen, but women to go into the workforce and farmers and transportation drivers.
Absolutely, Julie. And as you said, there's a lot more of a Canadian feeling to these. There's no talk about the Empire or even the King, and there's no depictions of the Union Jack in any of these, as we saw was quite commonplace in those first war posters.
That's right. Canada's become its own country. We've moved on and we're looking for our own identity. And Mackenzie King feels that he can bring that in through this kind of type of propaganda.
What are we looking at in here? There's quite a selection in the case here.
There was quite a broad range of propaganda during the Second World War, and another big segment of the population that the government sort of rallies at this point is children. So we have this little stamp book. What would happen is every Friday you would bring a quarter to school and your teacher would give you a stamp. Once you got $4 worth of stamps in your book, you could close it off, mail it off to Ottawa. At the end of the war, Ottawa would send you $5 back.
Really?
So it's teaching children, you know, about participating in the war, about economics, about savings. The social pressure was just even going down to children.
Well, I have to say thank you, Julie. This has been a wonderful opportunity to look at the propaganda of the First and Second World War and see the sort of changes that occurred throughout that time.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I was glad to have you.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. After the break, I'll be at the Naval Museum to learn about the progression of telegraph devices used to communicate between the bridge and the engine room aboard naval vessels. Engine order telegraphs are devices used on vessels for the officers to communicate orders from the bridge to the engine room. I'm meeting with expert Rick Sanderson at the Naval Museum to see some engine order telegraphs and discuss their advancements and how remote-controlled telegraphs became the new standard. Rick, I understand you have quite a selection of early onboard communication devices for me to take a look at.
Yes, we do. We have some set up here in the library and a couple other places in the museum, so we'll go take a look at those. As vessels moved away from being sail-powered into motor-powered, there had to be a way of communicating between the bridge, the command structure, and the engine room. Speaking tubes were incorporated at that time, and they've been in continuous use right through until the 1960s. The engine order telegraph is a piece of mechanical equipment that transmits orders from the bridge to the engine. It's a series of chains that are inside the body of the piece of equipment, and There's a dial with marks for speed and for direction forward and aft. That information is transmitted to the engine room to an identical dial, and the response back from the engine room confirms that they actually have received and executed the order.
Rick, I know that coming off the age of sail, there was quite a change in the way communication had to happen aboard a ship. When the engine rooms are moving down below the water line and the bridge is still in the same place, there must have been quite a different need for the kind of technology.
I thought we could start with these pieces here because they were widespread during the late 19th century through the First World War and certainly in the Second World War as well. These are voice tubes, and it would be mounted like so. And you speak into that funnel, it catches most of your voice. It's a flexible brass tube so that it can get in and out of bulkheads without having sharp right angles. And you can see on the labels on here that they're specific tubes going to specific areas in the ship. There would be somebody stationed at each of the half a dozen or so mouthpieces that are up on the bridge. And then there would be people stationed down in the engine room to receive the order.
So that's the earlier forms when we were just using tubes, and then we're moving on to this, which looks essentially like a telephone.
These are not telephones in the traditional sense of telephones. They will run on low voltage, but they're not meant to be a total communication device within the ship itself. Very specific.
I see. So this would just be from one point to another. Is that right?
Yes.
Rick, you mentioned that there's another piece of technology not represented here. That's the engine order telegraph, is it?
That's correct. We have samples of that downstairs. We can go take a look at that. And they overlap much of this technology. The engine order telegraph is still used on quite a number of different kinds of ships. If there's a steam or nuclear propulsion involved, then it has to have an engineer at the other end to actually engage those turbines. We have some engine order telegraphs displayed downstairs, so we'll take a look at those.
Excellent. That makes one feel sort of as if we're going down below to the engine rooms, Rick.
Well, we need more noise if we're going to do that.
Yes, and I suppose it would be a little more cramped as well.
And it would smell.
Rick, the examples of items that we looked at upstairs, those were all relying on voice communication.
Correct.
These engine order telegraphs, they're quite different.
There'd be this up on the bridge, and there'd be the similar item down in the engine room. You can see there's a green and there's a red. Well, that's forward and backward. So they're fail-safe chain drive. There's no electronic connection whatsoever between the bridge and the engine room. It's just a series of almost like bicycle chains that run these things. And the response is from the engine room would be back to the same place.
I see. So it's not actually that you're moving so much. That's actually to see what the other person is doing.
Exactly.
Right.
That's to tell you that they've actually received the order and executed the order.
Rick, as we've talked about, these are now more of a backup technology if they are on a ship at all.
Yes.
So what is coming in that's replacing them as the primary means of communication and control?
Well, it looks like the dashboard of an airplane or a car. There are a number of different kinds of gauges, controls. The actual wheel is now just a bit of a joystick. They don't have ship's wheels like what we've got right here.
Really?
The future of the technology is that control system directly from the bridge.
Right. And so in that case, you are actually directly controlling the engines, are you?
That's correct.
Or there's not someone in the engine room making those changes?
There are people in the engine room, but they're not the ones who are actually inputting the order. The order is coming from the bridge, staying on the bridge, and then it's an electronic connection down to the motors.
Right. Rick, I think it's safe to say that the remote control throttle is certainly an upgrade over the engine order telegraph. Are there any other ways in which this upgrade has benefited things aboard the ship?
The engines that are being used now are very different from the old steamers, which is what we were using destroyer escorts. They're called steamers, and you needed to have personnel to actually make that connection between the engine and the propeller, the steam drive. That is a faster connection with the new engine, so you don't really need anything in between in terms of manipulating controls to make that engine work. You still have to have engine maintenance, you have to have people there making sure everything's working properly, but the actual mechanisms are different than they were in the past. There are changes that have happened that are going backwards now. The US Navy brought out one that was a touchscreen, and they found that they couldn't make it work.
Really?
Train up the personnel, and it had all kinds of glitches. So they've reversed that. The entire class of vessel has gone back to more direct control.
It was a good day for whoever the contractor was replacing all those
That's
pieces.
correct. There's always money.
Rick, would the remote control throttle completely supersede and take away any utility of the engine order telegraph?
You'll still find these, not exactly this one, of course, but you'll find similar items on board many ships today because there's no failure involved in these, because they're totally mechanical. You have electronic problems on board ships even now. So that dashboard has some potential for failure.
Right.
Engine order telegraphs are still used today. They are Department of Defense requirement. And if there's any kind of steam power or turbine power, there has to be somebody there who is an engineer who can actually incorporate the order into firing up those propellers.
Rick, thank you for taking me through this wide swath of the history of communication aboard ships.
You're very welcome. It's been fun to go through it and bone up on what I should be knowing.
Absolutely. Coming up next, I'll take a look at a wooden aircraft part that Aviation Museum President Mark People tells me is from the wreckage of an unknown de Havilland Mosquito, also known as the Wooden Wonder. At the Aviation Museum, Mark People has a wooden piece from a de Havilland Mosquito that he wants to show me. This piece is believed to be from a crash site in Nova Scotia, but they still aren't sure exactly which aircraft it came from, given the great number of downed mosquitoes strewn across the province during the Second World War.
The de Havilland DH-98 Mosquito is a twin-engined, all-wooden aircraft that was employed as a fighter and a fighter bomber, photo reconnaissance aircraft, and the de Havilland Mosquito was nicknamed the Wooden Wonder because of its all-wooden construction and its ability to be very fast and maneuverable. It was a private venture of de Havilland to create it and basically sell it to the British government. It was flown in 1941 and it became a successful photo reconnaissance aircraft due to its ability to fly at high speed. And it was also built in Canada by de Havilland Canada, and they produced 1,100 examples in Downsview, Ontario.
So Mark, I actually have a bit of a personal connection to the Mosquito.
Well, that's interesting. What's the connection?
Well, following the war, when they didn't need to be building mosquitoes anymore, my grandfather and a few other men owned a conglomerate of companies, one of which was Industrial Shipping Limited, based out of Mahone Bay. And what they had done was they bought the equipment and the materials used in the manufacture of mosquito bombers and took it and started building boats out of it, little speedboats known as the Plycraft.
Oh.
So they were using the same molded plywood technology that went into the bombers to make these boats.
Wow, it's an interesting story.
So you can see one now on display at the Maritime Museum, and there's still quite a few on the water, actually. This is even more than I was expecting, Mark.
Well, this is from KB288, which was a Mosquito that crashed on November 30th, 1944 on Higgins Mountain in Westchester County, Nova Scotia. Unfortunately, both crew were killed. The pilot was Bredner and the navigator was an airman by the name of Bennett. Interestingly enough, Bredner was actually son of Air Vice Marshal Sir Lloyd Bredner. His son was 20 years old and was killed in this crash.
And what were they doing, do you know, when the plane crashed?
They were doing a typical cross-country exercise, and at that point during the war, OTUs, operational training units, were operating Mosquitoes out of Greenwood and also Debert. This one came out of Debert, Nova Scotia. It was a group actually that recovered them about 10 years ago. They grabbed pieces of it and they actually set up a memorial information stand at the site of the crash. So if you go up the mountain, there's actually a board that reads about the crash and who the people were.
Mark, could you tell me a bit about some of the things we're looking at here?
This particular piece here is part of the radiator shroud on the front of the Mosquito. Obviously, it had two Rolls-Royce Merlin engines that were liquid cooled, and there were radiators buried in these metal shrouds. The other interesting piece, obviously, is part of the foot pedals, and these were a cast item, and that's what they looked like originally, but we can actually see this was part of an adjustable footrest that was actually, you could adjust it, and that's what those edges mean, and you can see it in that better picture. The original color has remained fairly true after all these years, either being buried or scattered across the hillside.
Mark, this is very interesting, but I see we have another couple of larger pieces over here.
Yes, and they will demonstrate something else very interesting. We'll need to put our gloves on at this point to handle the items, obviously.
Well, I brought a pair with me. So Mark, what are we looking at here?
Well, what we're looking at is actually part of the wing spar, which is running here. And there would have been two wing spars and a Mosquito wing. And bolted to that wing spar is actually a control cable pulley. Just would be on the wing and would be adjusting your ailerons. So again, a big piece of metal casting, which you don't expect to see in a wooden aircraft, but there was quite a bit of metal in a Mosquito, surprisingly so.
Where did this piece come from?
This is part of the crash of KB288, which is Bredner was a pilot.
And it is funny when you mention, how many different materials there are on a supposedly wooden aircraft. I mean, we have the wood here, but those brass screws, and that looks like aluminum, steel wire, and then some other form of cast metal here. It
Exactly.
seems like, yeah.
There's a lot to the construction of it, and I guess this piece demonstrates really just how simple you think one piece is, but then you look at it and how many pieces are required to get it to this point.
So Mark, we have another piece here. Is that from the same wreck?
No, that's kind of a mystery piece. We know 100% certain it's Mosquito, but we don't know exactly which aircraft crashed. It sort of turned up at the museum one day, and there's been no sort of paperwork.
Not knowing what crash this came from or anything, how do you know it's from a Mosquito and not just, a wooden crate or something like that?
Obviously, the way the construction is, and the big giveaway is the two plywood pieces with bolts in the middle. That's indicative of a Mosquito. No other aircraft really used that balsa wood as extensively as the Mosquito did. These are very thin veneer plywood, and that's the other indicator of it. It's very thin, and also if you hold it, it's very lightweight.
Oh my goodness, that's shocking really. It feels like foam or something.
Right.
Yeah. Is there anything to be learned from that stamp? Do we know much about what that indicates?
At this point, no. I mean, it says Weber on it, but as to exactly what that was, and I haven't been able to turn up any loose ends that represented that. If it had the serial number on it, well, that would be very easy to tell, but it's just a random ink stamp number. It could be an inspector stamp, and that's probably what I assume that it is.
Right. So you think there's a pretty good chance this is from a Nova Scotian crash, do you?
I have every indication because, again, the only place that used the Mosquito in the East Coast here was either Debert or Greenwood. So it's either a Debert or Greenwood aircraft.
Mark, I have to say, of all the pieces, this has really been the most interesting for me to look at, particularly with the family connection to the technology that was used on the Mosquitoes. I really hope that someday some sort of breakthrough can be had with this number and the Weber stamp. But in the meantime, thank you for having me and going through the mystery with me.
Thanks for being interested in it.
It's been my pleasure. Having special access to go beyond museum exhibits reveals some of history's best kept secrets and most interesting stories. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of military artifacts on another episode of Militaria at the museum.